So, what's in it for South Africa in this conflict? Well, I'm joined by Stephanie Wolters, Senior Research Fellow at the South African Institute of International Affairs. She's also a Director at Okapi Consulting. A very good afternoon to you, Stephanie. Thanks very much for your time. What's in it for South Africa in the DRC that we would sacrifice our soldiers for?
Well, I think we have to remember that South Africa is not there bilaterally. It's there as part of a force put together by SADC. It also includes Tanzania and Malawi. And of course, the DRC is a SADC member state. This is not the first time that South Africa and SADC have come to the assistance of the DRC government when it's faced the M23 rebels. Your previous speaker was referring to the 2012-2013 crisis, and in that case, SADC also got involved and became the Force Intervention Brigade. So South Africa has a history in the DRC, and it has, I think, also ambitions to play a role in peacemaking and peacekeeping on the continent.
But then, I think what many people are criticizing our government for is the fact that our soldiers aren't properly equipped. They are not budgeted for. Technologically, they are found wanting as well. So in whatever may have been the motivating factor, including, of course, us being part of a regional contingent, if we're ill-equipped, then such decisions have to be reviewed.
Well, of course. I mean, I think that the first thing that you should be doing before you decide to participate in a regional peacekeeping force is see whether you have the capacity, and also to assess whether you can make a difference to that conflict. I know that there are many military analysts who have criticized the fact that there's not enough air support, or that there is no air support to the SADC force this time around, and that generally the resources are insufficient. Certainly, it's an extremely expensive mission, estimated to cost about $500 million a year. Last year, that full budget wasn't met, although South Africa did contribute $100 million US. This year, SADC has renewed that mandate. We're not entirely sure where those resources are coming from. So that is, I think, a very fair criticism. Why did South Africa choose to do that? Does the political side of things not necessarily know where its military stands? I think the other aspect of that, too, is understanding what kind of a military opponent you're facing. And in the DRC, in the eastern DRC today, the M23 that South Africa and the Tanzanians and the Malawians encountered in 2012, 2013 is not the same M23 today. It's a much stronger force. Rwanda has always backed it as a proxy rebel group, and today we have something close to 4,000 Rwandan Defense Force troops supporting the M23 in eastern DRC. So it's a formidable army that Sami DRC has to face, and all the more reason, of course, to well-equip and well-resource the soldiers who participate in it.
Are you able to answer that question you posed right at the beginning of your answer? Because, I mean, in other words, do we as South Africa, but also as SADC or part of SADC, actually conduct that evaluation exercise to say, given everything that is happening in Goma in particular, are we able to make the difference before even committing people and assessing whether indeed you are going to make a difference?
Well, look, I can't speak for the Ministry of Defense or for the South African government or the presidency. I don't know what kind of deliberations have gone on at that level prior to the deployment. What I can say as an analyst is that the decision to deploy that force did take us by surprise. It took many of us by surprise. It had followed a number of years where the relationship between SADC and between South Africa and the DRC had been rather icy, and where in fact the DRC had joined another regional player, the East African Community. So it did take us by surprise. Yes.
But then in situations like these, is there no time when, especially let's say on the back of this event, as far as you are aware, don't people then sit around the table, make an assessment of the situation, regroup, and say, what do we do next? Because all we've heard so far from the spokespeople for the South African National Defence Force is that, oh, our troops are safely back at base. We have nothing to worry about. And yet, on the other hand, you have the M23 saying we've taken over Goma, which suggests to me, unless I'm missing something, that those people who are at base are actually besieged.
Yes, I mean, I think that that's a very good question, of course. I mean, you know, if the South Africans are back at their base in Sake, which does seem likely because the airport in Goma is closed and has been is now under the control of the M23, so that's no longer a way by which the SANDF troops could leave Goma if they wanted to. If they're now back in Sake, while they may no longer be in the middle of the combat zone and perhaps not even necessarily a target, one then has to wonder, you know, why are they there at all? If they've been defeated by the M23 as they attempt to take the largest city in the province, the provincial capital, and the largest urban center in the province, which is of course a strategic place, then what value does this deployment actually have? What deterrent value does SAMI DRC have, and what offensive value does SAMI DRC have? I mean, I think that unlike several years ago, when the South Africans were in the Central African Republic, when Zuma was still president, there was also a battle there, the Battle of Bangui, where a number of SANDF soldiers lost their lives. There was significantly less attention paid to that in South Africa at the time. And I think partially because back then the ANC wasn't under quite the level of scrutiny and wasn't perhaps quite as unpopular as it has become. So today Cyril Ramaphosa faces a lot more questions about what exactly is happening in the DRC, why the South African forces are deployed there, and whether or not they're able to defend themselves than Zuma did back then. So I think also the domestic situation here has changed in terms of the kind of focus that is being put on this deployment.
Of course, I mean, the SANDF spokesperson has been at pains trying to draw everyone's attention to what he calls what are the facts, which is that our soldiers there are not in a fighting capacity, but are part of a peacekeeping mission, which offers no, I mean, it's no comfort to the families of the 9 people who have been killed and the others who have been injured.
No, absolutely not. And I think that that's also not an accurate representation of the mandate of SAMI DRC. SAMI DRC is there not as a peacekeeping or a peace-maintaining force. It's there in an active military zone. There is no ceasefire in place. The peace agreement between Kinshasa and Kigali that was on the table, both parties walked away from that in December. And the SADC mandate is actually more offensive than it has been in the past. It has a more offensive mandate to some extent than the Force Intervention Brigade, of which South Africa is also a part. It is, in fact, to help liberate areas that are being controlled by the M23. So the idea that this is a peacekeeping force that is merely standing in a buffer zone where it's unlikely to become or to be affected by direct combat simply isn't accurate.
Stephanie, let me thank you very much for your time and insights. Really appreciate it.